Hi, my name is Sarah Chute. This is my French language and culture presentation. We will be looking at an introduction to French language and culture. We'll be comparing French phonology to English phonology. We'll be looking at French morphology, and then next we will look at French syntax. And so after this, we're going to be comparing, or just seeing how we can help French speakers learn English. French is a Romance language, meaning that it evolved from Latin. Specifically, it developed mostly under the influence of Gallo-Romance, which was the spoken Latin of northern Gaul. As Romance languages tend to have very regular patterns, some French speakers may find the irregularity of English verb conjugations, for example, a little bit challenging. It is the sixth most spoken language in the world. It is expected to be the most spoken language in the world by 2050. It is the official language of 29 countries. There are roughly 76 million native speakers worldwide, and about 77 to 110 million others are secondary speakers of French. French continues to be used as a primary or secondary language in many diplomatic settings or in worldwide organizations, such as the United Nations, European Union, World Trade Organization, Médecins Sans Frontières, which is Doctors Without Borders, and the International Organization of la Francophonie, which you can see the flag in the lower left corner here. And this shows the members of that organization and who are actual members or observers, but just overall where French is spoken in the world. French families tend to be nuclear, with both parents working. This may give students a stable, supportive environment in which language study is encouraged. In France, medical and scientific fields tend to be the most praised. By law, French is required in all commercial and workplace settings. This may affect English language learning if the student is not motivated, if they don't expect to use a language other than French in their future. While 98% of metropolitan France can and does speak French, students often study 2 to 3 additional languages in high school, so this experience may facilitate English language learning as just a background for language acquisition. The French government is highly centralized, which does have an effect on school curriculum. Main meals are eaten at home as a family, so parents and children both come home from work and school for a 2-hour midday meal. They have 5 weeks vacation time and a 35-hour work week. So you can see that time is an important thing, and it's a little bit slower than, for example, American culture. The French also show respect for superiors, strangers, and teachers with the formal second-person pronoun, which is vous. Take a look at the consonant and vowel phonemes of French. We are going to be comparing these phonemes with English ones. Take a moment and just try to see if you notice any overlap. Here is a French versus English phonology chart. So this doesn't include all the French phonemes that we saw in the previous slide, but it does show us what English consonants are shared or unshared by French speakers. So you can see like dental fricatives, for example, are not shared by French speakers. Alveolar approximates aren't, but what French use instead is the uvular trill and approximate, or trill and fricative. So you can see how perhaps orthographically that's going to be pronounced in a different way just when they read an R, for example. L2 speakers of English who have French as their native language will likely have good success with many English phonemes. As we saw in the past slide, there are many overlapping phonemes, and both languages use the same written alphabet. Some challenges may occur with the phonemes I have listed on this slide. So I'm going to just give examples for these words that you see under the difficult English phonemes. Words like where, thin, the, church, dungeon, house, and perhaps diphthongs like those in the word I, toy, and out. Other challenges may arise out of the English orthography and the different phonology French speakers associate with the combinations of letters that they read. In French, the letter that we would say I is always pronounced I, a closed front unrounded vowel. You can see this example in their word for thank you, which is merci. In English, words like slit or mile have different sounds yet are written with the same letter I. A word like kilo, though, is pronounced with a closed front unrounded vowel, E, So it would be the easiest for an L1 French speaker to pronounce of these words that I gave. French morphology. The French language is highly synthetic and highly inflective compared to English. A large aspect of this is due to the fact that French is a gendered language, so nouns either have masculine or feminine genders. This is represented with the type of article that precedes the noun, le for masculine, la for feminine, as well as certain suffixes such as the addition of an e for feminine words. Professions can be masculine or feminine to specify the gender of the individual they describe. So for example, the word for lawyer is masculine, l'avocat, but it becomes feminized with that e suffix when it describes a female lawyer, so it becomes l'avocate. Plurals are represented in the form of a suffix, usually an s, but it could be an x if the vowel ends in a pronounced vowel sound. Adjectives take on suffixes to agree with the gender and plurality of the noun that they describe. So in this last part, root suffixes and prefixes, you can see les ex-avocat means the female lawyers who are no longer lawyers. Les is the article for the, ex meaning no longer, just like in English, avocat, which is lawyer, and then an e at the end, which means that it's female, and an s, which means that it's plural. Derivational morphology can be seen through the use of suffixes. Ite is the same purpose as ity in English, so it turns an adjective into a noun. For example, l'absurdité means absurdity and derives meaning from the word l'absurde. Is like English er, meaning le danseur is the dancer from la danse, which means the dance. And ment is comparable to English's adverbial ly. So to go from clear to clearly, they go from clair to clairement. Prefixes can also be used for derivational morphemes, such as un or in, which creates the opposite meaning of the root, or re, which creates meaning of the repetition of the verb, like to redo something, like in English. Verbs have conjugations for each subject. The regularly conjugated verbs fall into three categories: er verbs, ir verbs, and re verbs, meaning that they end in these letters in their infinite forms. So note how these endings attach to the root stem of the infinite verbs. So danser, finir, and prendre mean to dance, to finish, and to take. That ending is replaced by a conjugation when it is used by a subject. By comparison, English verbs are much more regular. So as a synthetic language, French could impact English by the addition of unnecessary articles, such as articles that are always required in French. So for example, I am at school is what we might say, but a French speaker might say I am at the school. And also there's no gender in English, so maybe if we would say it, I love my house, it is big. They might say I love my house, she is big, because la maison, house, is feminine in French. French is a subject-verb order, or subject-verb-object word order. So the sentence structure is subject plus ne plus verb plus pas plus the accusative plus the circumstances. So ne pas goes around a verb and that negates it. So essentially the same as do not in English. Accusative, those are the direct objects of a sentence, and circumstances are the elements under which the action takes place. In forming questions, there are three possibilities. The speaker can say est-ce que, plus a normal sentence structure, which essentially means do, and just like in English, do you, blah, blah, blah. Therefore, answers will always be yes or no questions, oui ou non, in those, unless it does have one of the question words, which I have listed on the bottom of this slide, and also what the little girl here is saying. that can precede est-ce que and turn it into a where is this or whatever. Another way to form a question is through inversion. So notice how in this sentence, tu manges le dîner, you eat the dinner. You can turn that into a question saying, are you eating dinner? If you say, manges-tu le dîner? So the subject and the verb inverse when you form a question in this form. Lastly, inflection alone can be used to pose a question. So to ask, are we going out? You can make this statement, we are going out, on sort, and inflect it with an upwards tonality to ask, are we going out? On sort, which is, I mean, literally, we are going out, just like that, so the voice raises. French speakers may inflect their statements into questions or not have auxiliaries in them, and this is one of the first common syntactic issues that I'm going to be talking about. So an example of that is they might say, you live in London, what time you arrive at school? Instead of, do you live in London, what time do you arrive at school? In question tags, French speakers often use n'est-ce pas, meaning isn't that so? And may use a direct translation in English, where native English speakers would use a different auxiliary verb than is, or would conjugate the verb to correspond to the subject. So they might say, you love soccer, isn't it? Instead of, you love soccer, right? Or something like that. In French, the adverb comes between verb and object. So instead of saying, my son speaks French very well, the translation, or how they would maybe say this sentence in English would be, my son speaks very well English. Because that is the construction in French, is to put the adverb in between there. Additionally, French speakers may use infinitives after the modals. So English native speakers would take off tu off of the infinitive in this case. But French speakers might say, I must to go home this evening, instead of I must go home this evening. French speakers may also use an infinitive where English speakers would use a gerund. So where an English speaker might say they are not interested in learning about history, French speakers may say they are not interested in to learn about history. So an important aspect in teaching English to French speakers is that we need to explain how these infinitives work in these examples of after modal or in place of a gerund and when those cases arrive. So to conclude, when teaching English to French speakers, it is important that you know some things about their culture so that you can, so that you're equipped to teach them better. One thing about French culture is that they appreciate direct statements and straightforwardness. Their culture is not as busy as ours, so try slowing down and being patient. Flexibility is really key. For example, just in general, 10 minutes late in France isn't really a big deal. And so as you're teaching to French students, make sure that you're just flexible and not so rushed. There are many similarities between English and French, so try to use these in teaching to make things more clear, a little bit easier, and to just share the commonalities between the two languages and how they correlate to each other. It'll make it a lot easier to learn these sort of patterns if they can see a comparison with their own language. And lastly, French people tend to keep their eyes on the world globally a little bit more than many Americans. So they are often interested in culture, politics, and opinion of the global world. So perhaps use those interests to keep their learning engaged. So maybe bring in some pop culture things or just things that are interesting about the world around them and specifically about the English-speaking world. And that will make their English learning a little bit more interesting and help you in teaching them the different linguistic patterns in English. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful in explaining a little bit about French language and culture and how English teachers can use this information to teach French students.